Braylen Porter didn't see the bicycle coming, but Sawyer O'Connell did. 1 second she was stepping off the curb, distracted by the voice in her earpiece giving her stock updates, and the next a strong arm yanked her back with so much force she slammed against a solid chest. The cyclist blurred past, missing her by inches. Tires screeched. Someone yelled. Her heart pounded in her ribs like a drum. "Are you okay?" the man asked, holding her tight for a second longer before letting her go. Braylen blinked up at him, dazed. Yeah. I think so." Sawyer looked her over quickly, concern etched deep in his face. His eyes were a warm hazel, his jaw rough with end-of-day stubble, and his hair was shoved back like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. He wore a faded t-shirt with a tear on the shoulder and jeans that had definitely seen better days. "You could have gotten killed," he muttered, shaking his head. "People blow through that intersection like it's a racetrack. I swear, this city." He trailed off and looked down. "Sorry. I didn't mean to grab you like that." "No, thank you," she said, breathless. "You saved me." He gave her a quick nod and turned to walk away, pulling a little girl's hand into his. Braylen's heart caught in her throat. The girl had a pink backpack and a unicorn clip in her curly hair. She looked up at the man with big brown eyes. "Daddy," the girl said. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, Lulu," Sawyer said gently. "Let's get home before it rains." Braylen took a step forward before she could stop herself. "Wait," she called, her voice louder than she meant. "Let me at least thank you properly." Sawyer turned. "Not necessary." "I want to, please," she said, stepping closer. "Can I buy you coffee or something?" He looked her over, and Braylen could feel him trying to figure her out. Her sleek white blouse, the diamond studs in her ears, the polished heels, none of it screamed normal. And she hated that. For once, she wished she didn't look like someone who had a penthouse uptown and a personal driver waiting 3 blocks away. He gave her a polite half-smile. "That's kind, but we've got to get going." Braylen crouched down to Lulu's level. "Hi, I'm Braylen. I like your unicorn." Lulu grinned. "Her name's Sprinkle." Braylen laughed. "She looks like a sprinkle." Sawyer sighed. "Lulu, come on. Can I say bye?" Quickly. Lulu turned to her dad. "She's nice." Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, still doesn't mean we accept coffee from strangers." Braylen stood up. "Okay, I get it. You're cautious. That's smart. But I don't usually almost die on Tuesdays, and I'd really like to do something to say thank you." Sawyer studied her again. She could feel him trying to decide if she was dangerous or just stubborn. He finally sighed. "We live 3 blocks from here. There's a bodega on the corner. You can buy us a juice." Braylen smiled. "Deal." The bodega was small, the kind of place with flickering lights and a cat sleeping on a stack of newspapers. Braylen had never stepped foot inside before, but Sawyer acted like he came here every other day. Lulu picked out an apple juice and a peanut butter cookie. Sawyer grabbed a black coffee. Braylen paid before he could even reach for his wallet. "I said juice, not groceries," he said, frowning. "I know," she said, "but I'm stubborn. You'll learn that." He gave her a long look. "You always talk like that." "Like you're trying to convince someone to buy into your startup." She laughed, caught off guard. "Only when I'm interested." His mouth twitched like he wanted to smile but didn't trust himself to. They sat outside on the old wooden bench. Lulu climbed up between them, swinging her legs. "So," Sawyer said, sipping his coffee, "what do you do, Braylen?" She hesitated. "Investments? Like stocks?" "Yeah, and real estate, tech startups," he nodded. "You're good at it." "I'd like to think so. Must be if you're wearing shoes that cost more than my rent." Braylen flushed. "I didn't mean to come off. It's all right," he said quickly. "I'm not judging, just not used to people like you being in my neighborhood, especially not almost getting hit by a bike." She smiled. "I was distracted. My fault." He looked at her for a long second. "You really wanted to thank me." "I did." "Why?" Braylen glanced at Lulu. "Because you didn't hesitate. You jumped in and saved me without knowing anything about me. That deserves more than a nod and a thanks." He looked down. "I'm a dad." "It's kind of automatic at this point." Braylen softened. "Lulu's lucky." Sawyer didn't respond to that. He just sipped his coffee and looked out at the darkening sky. "You're not from here," he said finally. "I grew up in Connecticut, but I moved here for work." "And you live?" "Uptown." He nodded like he expected that. Braylen took a breath. "Can I be honest?" He raised an eyebrow. "You haven't been," she smiled. "I'm supposed to be at a dinner right now, with investors. High-end steakhouse, rooftop view, the works." He looked over. "And instead you're here. With a guy in a ripped shirt and a 6-year-old drinking juice." "I think I made the better choice." Sawyer blinked, and for the first time he looked unsure. "You don't know me." "Not yet." He stared at her like she was some kind of puzzle. Then he stood, brushing crumbs off his jeans. "Come on, Lulu, let's head home." Braylen stood too. "Can I walk with you?" He hesitated, then nodded once. They walked slowly, Lulu skipping ahead. "This is going to sound crazy," Braylen said, "but I'd like to see you again." Sawyer looked at her sideways. "Why?" "I don't know, I just do." He stopped in front of a small walk-up building with peeling paint and flowers growing in chipped pots. He dug out his keys. "You want to see me again," he said. "You'll have to find me. I'm not on social media. I don't have a business card." She smiled. Challenge accepted. He paused before opening the door. "You're really something, you know that? I've heard." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but then Lulu tugged his hand. "Daddy, I'm sleepy." He opened the door. "Good night, Braylen." "Good night, Sawyer." And then he was gone. Braylen walked back to her car with a strange flutter in her chest. One moment, one pull. One man who didn't know she had $1 million portfolio and a name that made bankers stand up straighter. He just saw her, and somehow she didn't want that moment to be the last. 3 days passed before Braylen found herself standing in front of the same walk-up building, clutching a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. She wasn't sure what she expected, maybe for Sawyer to open the door and be surprised, maybe for Lulu to scream her name like some reunion in a movie. Instead, nothing happened. She knocked again. A muffled voice called from inside, followed by the shuffle of footsteps. The door opened a crack, chain still hooked. Sawyer's expression was wary. "I brought breakfast," Braylen said, lifting the bag slightly. He looked at her in silence for a moment, then unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. He had a towel slung over one shoulder, and his shirt was damp near the collar. Steam drifted from the hallway behind him. "You tracked me down just to bring croissants?" he asked. "They're not just croissants. They're from a place in the village that only sells 12 a day." "I bribed the counter guy with a signed Knicks jersey." Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "You collect jerseys?" "No," she said, stepping past him into the small front room. "I invest in players who do." He closed the door behind her, clearly still unsure. "I was going to call first," she continued, "but then I remembered you don't believe in phones or convenience." "I believe in privacy. There's a difference." A soft voice called from down the hall. "Daddy, who's that?" Sawyer stepped into the hallway. "Just a friend, Lou." "Finish brushing your teeth." Braylen placed the bag on the worn coffee table and took in the room. The couch had a blanket folded neatly over one arm. A small bookshelf was crammed with paperbacks and children's drawings. It smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. "You live here alone with her?" she asked when he came back. "Yeah," he said, not elaborating. She hesitated. "Where's her mom?" He poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen sink. "Gone, left when Lulu was 3. "I'm sorry," Sawyer shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Don't be." She wasn't cut out for this. Braylen sat down on the edge of the couch. "You seem like you are," he gave a dry laugh. "Parenting isn't about being cut out for it. It's about showing up, every day. No matter how tired or broke or mad you are." Lulu ran in then, her curls still damp, wearing a mismatched pajama set. She beamed when she saw Braylen. "You came back." Braylen smiled. "I told you Sprinkle was too cute to forget." Sawyer's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything as Lulu climbed onto the couch beside Braylen and peeked into the paper bag. "Can I have one?" "They're all for you," Braylen said. Sawyer frowned. "She's not used to gifts from strangers." Braylen looked at him. Then maybe it's time she got used to people being kind without wanting anything. He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on her longer than before. Lulu munched on a croissant, crumbs on her chin. "Daddy, are you gonna eat one?" "I'll have one later," he replied, his tone softer now. "You work weekends?" Braylen asked, turning to him. "Odd jobs, construction mostly." "Some repair work when it comes up. You ever think about doing something else?" "I don't have the luxury of thinking about dreams." Braylen tilted her head. "That's a shame. I think you'd be good at running things. You've got that." "Presence," he gave her a look. "Presence doesn't pay rent." "No, but connections do, and I have a few." Sawyer crossed his arms. "So this is it. The real reason you came back. You want to fix something?" "No," she said calmly. "I just don't like watching people waste potential." "I'm not your project, Braylen." She stood. "I know. That's why I'm here instead of sending my assistant." That made him blink. "I came back because I liked talking to you, because you didn't ask for anything, and because I haven't stopped thinking about you since Tuesday." Sawyer didn't respond at first. Then he looked toward Lulu, who was now focused on peeling layers off her pastry like it was an art form. "You're not like anyone I've ever met." "Good," she said, "because I don't want to be forgettable." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes unreadable. "You should go before the rain starts." Braylen stepped closer, her voice low. "Only if you promise this isn't the last time." Sawyer didn't answer right away. Then he reached into the drawer by the sink and pulled out a scrap of paper. He wrote something and handed it to her. "My address." "In case you forget." She folded it slowly, slipping it into her purse. "I won't." As she reached the door, Lulu called out, "Bye, Braylen." Braylen smiled. "Bye, Lulu. Don't let Sprinkle eat all the crumbs." The door closed behind her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she'd left part of herself behind. Sawyer watched the rain start to fall outside the window, his daughter humming quietly as she licked sugar off her fingers. He didn't know what Braylen's angle was, but something in him, something buried and cautious, wanted to see her again. Not because she brought expensive pastries or said all the right things, but because when she looked at him, he didn't feel like just a man holding everything together with duct tape and second shifts. He felt seen. And that was terrifying, and electric, and impossible to ignore. "Can I ask you something without you getting weird about it?" Braylen asked, carefully setting down the screwdriver. Sawyer looked up from the piece of plywood he was anchoring to a sawhorse. "Depends." "You planning to insult me again?" "I never insulted you," she said, brushing sawdust off her jeans. "I just pointed out that this shed could collapse in a light breeze." He gave her a look. "It's not a shed. It's a greenhouse. It's a frame with hope." Sawyer hid a grin behind his shoulder as he tightened another bolt. Braylen had insisted on helping him with a weekend project, a community garden setup he'd volunteered to build for the local school. To her credit, she was learning to use tools faster than he expected. And she hadn't once complained about the heat, though her designer sunglasses were now hanging crookedly from her shirt collar. "You still haven't answered my question," she said. "I'm waiting for it." She stood, dusted her palms off, and leaned against the stack of bricks beside them. "Why haven't you ever left the city?" Sawyer paused, flexing his hand. "Who said I haven't?" "You did. Not directly. But you talk like a man who's only ever known one zip code." He considered her carefully before answering. "I left once. Years ago. Thought I'd follow a band I was in. We had gigs lined up in Boston, Philly, Chicago. Didn't last long. You were in a band. Don't act surprised." "I had long hair and bad decisions." Braylen laughed. "What did you play?" "Guitar. Wrote a few songs, too." She tilted her head. "Why'd you stop?" He tapped the wood with the back of his knuckles. "Life doesn't always leave room for chords and lyrics." "Maybe not. But that doesn't mean the music disappears." Sawyer didn't respond. He just returned to his work, but Braylen noticed the slight shift in his jaw. After a beat, she picked up a level and placed it across the top of the beam he'd just installed. "Looks good. You're not bad at this. Don't sound so shocked." He wiped his brow. "You're full of surprises." She watched him for a moment before asking, Do you ever get tired of being the only one holding things together? Sawyer's shoulders stiffened. That come from concern or pity? Neither, just observation. He set down the drill and turned to face her. You want to know the truth? Most days I don't think about it. I wake up, make Lulu breakfast, work, come home, read to her, fix what's broken, sleep. Repeat. There's no time to feel anything about it. Braylen's eyes didn't leave his, and if there was time, he didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the cooler and pulled out 2 bottles of water. He handed her one. You always push this hard? He asked. I don't like surface level anything. People like you usually do. People like me, she echoed, raising a brow. He took a long drink. The ones used to things being handed over without asking twice. The ones who don't have to fight for scraps. You think I've never bled for anything? I think you've bled in boardrooms, not in basements. Braylen stepped closer. You don't know what I've had to do to stay where I am. Maybe not, he admitted. But you walk like the ground was built to hold you up. That's not something you can fake. She didn't back down. And you walk like you're afraid if you stop carrying everything, it'll all fall apart. The air between them thickened, the sound of distant traffic the only thing breaking the moment. You're not easy to ignore, he said finally. Good, she replied, because I'm not planning on going anywhere. A voice rang out from the school building behind them. Lulu came running toward them, her backpack bouncing with every step. Daddy, look, she shouted, holding up a crayon drawing. Miss Jensen said I could hang it in the hallway. Sawyer crouched to examine it. That's amazing, baby. You're getting really good. Braylen knelt beside them. Is that sprinkle in space? Yes, Lulu beamed. She's going to the moon. I always suspected she was an astronaut. Sawyer looked from the drawing to Braylen, then back to his daughter. Why don't you show Miss Jensen where you want to put it up? Lulu nodded and ran back toward the building. Braylen watched her go. She's bright. She's everything, Sawyer said quietly. Braylen hesitated. Does she know the kind of sacrifices you make for her? She doesn't need to. That's not her weight to carry. She'll know one day, Braylen said. And when she does, she'll never forget it. Sawyer looked at her, and this time there was no wall in his expression, no guarded hesitation. You're not what I expected when I pulled you off that street. She stepped closer. And what did you expect? A woman who'd thank me, maybe. Smile. Walk away. Would you have preferred that? No, Braylen smiled. Then I guess we're both full of surprises. He leaned in slightly, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. You keep pushing your way into my life like this, I might start letting you. I'm not asking for permission. Figured. They stood there, the scent of sawdust and sun between them, until Lulu's voice called again. Daddy. Miss Jensen said we can plant vegetables next week. Sawyer stepped back and called out, That's great, Lou, we'll be ready. Braylen touched his arm. One more question. Sawyer raised an eyebrow. If you could go back to music, just once, what would you play? He thought for a moment, the corner of his mouth lifting. Something that sounds like freedom. Braylen's heart kicked against her ribs. Then maybe you should. His eyes held hers a beat longer than they should have. Maybe he would. Maybe not. But for the first time in a long time, Sawyer O'Connell wondered what it would feel like to play a song not just for himself, but for someone who might actually want to listen. The first time Sawyer saw Braylen cry, she didn't try to hide it. It was late hours past, when any reasonable person should have been awake when she knocked on his door. Her mascara faintly smudged, and her heels dangling from one hand. She didn't speak right away, just stepped inside when he moved aside, the hallway light catching the shimmer of tears that hadn't yet fallen. He waited until she sat on the couch before asking, What happened? She took a breath like she was trying not to shake. My father's lawyers sold the last of his company tonight. I wasn't even told until an hour after the papers were signed. Sawyer didn't sit. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her closely. I spent years trying to prove I could hold my own, she said, and they just erased him, like he never built anything. He didn't try to offer advice. Instead, he walked to the kitchen. When he returned, he handed her a glass of water and sat beside her, quiet. She took a sip, then looked at him. "Why are you always so calm?" "I'm not," he said. "I just don't waste energy on what I can't fix today." Braylen turned toward him. "How do you know what's worth fixing?" He met her eyes. "The things that keep you up at night." They sat in silence for a while before she leaned her head against his shoulder, the tension in her finally giving way. He rested his palm lightly against her back, not moving, not asking for more. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said eventually. "I don't know how not to." Sawyer nodded once. "Then let me show you." The next afternoon, she returned not in heels, not in silk but in sneakers and an old sweatshirt. Lulu was coloring on the living room floor, surrounded by markers and a cardboard box that had been turned into a castle. When she saw Braylen, she waved a purple marker in the air. "I made a throne." Braylen crouched beside her. "Every queen needs one." Sawyer watched them from across the room. "She's been asking about you." Braylen looked up. "Yeah," he nodded. "Wants to know if you're moving in." She laughed, but the question hung in the air longer than it should have. Later, when they stood on the roof of his building, looking out at the skyline, Braylen folded her arms against the wind. "I've been thinking about leaving the firm," she said. Sawyer turned to her. "Since when?" "Since I realized I don't like who I have to be to stay." His voice was quiet. "And if you leave, who would you be?" She looked at him. "Someone who sleeps at night." Sawyer studied her for a long moment. "You sure?" "No," she said. "But I've spent 10 years being sure of the wrong things. Maybe it's time I take a risk that actually means something." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "If you fall, I'll catch you." She leaned her head against him. "That's what I'm afraid of." "Why?" "Because I don't know what to do when someone means it." Sawyer didn't speak. He just pulled her closer until the city faded around them. The following week, Braylen resigned. The news went public fast, investors buzzing, competitors circling, headlines speculating about her next move. She ignored all of it. Instead, she walked Lulu to school with Sawyer, helped him paint the final support beams of the greenhouse, and spent her mornings making pancakes instead of presentations. One evening, as they walked through an outdoor market along the river, Sawyer stopped in front of a booth selling handmade guitars. He picked one up, tested the strings, then handed it to her. "You're not serious," Braylen said. He tilted his head. "You said you wanted to hear something that sounded like freedom." She blinked. "You remember that? I remember everything you say." She stepped closer. "Play it." The vendor smiled and handed him a pick. Sawyer adjusted the strap and strummed a few chords, his fingers rough, the sound full and honest. He didn't sing. Didn't need to. The melody was low and steady, and when he looked up at her, it was like the street disappeared. Braylen swallowed. "Do you do this often?" "Just casually melt people in public," he laughed, setting the guitar down. "Only on Thursdays." They walked home with a new guitar and a bag of strawberries, Lulu asleep on Sawyer's shoulders. That night, after tucking her in, Sawyer found Braylen standing on the balcony, the city lights flickering behind her. "You look like you belong here," he said. She turned. "I've never felt more out of place, and somehow safer than I ever have." He stepped beside her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "This isn't the kind of proposal you probably imagined." She stared at it, stunned. "You're proposing?" "I am." She opened the box slowly, and inside wasn't a ring, but a silver key. "To what?" she whispered. "My life," he said. "Our life, if you want it." Her throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She took the key, her eyes shining. "Then yes." They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, two people who'd found something unexpected and impossible, and decided to stop running from it. 3 months later, Braylen stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the greenhouse, Lulu beside her holding the oversized scissors. Sawyer, in a suit for the first time in years, stood on her other side. The mayor gave a speech, the crowd applauded, and Braylen whispered, "You know this is just the beginning, right?" Sawyer leaned close. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." And in front of the community that had watched them grow together, they cut the ribbon not just on a garden, but on a future neither of them had planned for, but both had chosen. Because sometimes, the most unexpected love stories don't begin with a plan. They start with a pull, and end with forever. The rain hit the windows in soft, rhythmic taps as Braylen adjusted the collar of her blouse and glanced toward the clock on the wall. Lulu's school recital was set to start in 20 minutes, and Sawyer still hadn't returned from the neighborhood zoning meeting he'd volunteered to attend on behalf of the Garden Coalition. She paced once across the living room, then peered outside. The truth was, she wasn't worried. Not in the way she used to be, when everything felt like it would fall apart if one meeting went long or one piece of news didn't go her way. Life had shifted, slowed where it needed to, made room in places that used to be full of noise, but she still liked having him near. As she reached for her coat, the front door opened and Sawyer stepped inside, damp and flushed from the walk. He held a rolled-up folder in one hand and a triumphant grin on his face. "They approved the expansion," he said. Braylen's eyes widened. "Seriously," he nodded, running a hand through his rain-drenched hair. "Unanimous vote. We get the 2 extra lots behind the school, full access, no rent, 5-year guarantee." She crossed to him and kissed him before she could even think to say anything. He kissed her back, one hand wrapping around her waist, the other still holding the folder. When they finally broke apart, her voice was breathless. "This is massive. You did it." "We did it," he said. "You're the one who figured out how to make the funding work. I was just the numbers." "You're the heart," he chuckled. "Then let's go show up for the real star." They reached the school just as the lights were dimming. Lulu stood in the second row of the risers, wearing a silver crown made of glitter and cardboard, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she saw them, she beamed, her entire face lighting up. Braylen waved while Sawyer gave a quiet thumbs up. The class began their performance, a musical retelling of the solar system, complete with dancing planets and narrators in star-shaped hats. Lulu played the moon, orbiting her Earth partner with dramatic flair. As the children sang about gravity and stardust, Braylen felt Sawyer's hand brush against hers. She turned to him. "She shines when she's happy," he whispered, eyes still on Lulu. "She didn't always." "She does now," Braylen whispered back. After the recital, the 3 of them lingered in the classroom turned after-party, sipping fruit punch and chatting with teachers. Lulu introduced Braylen to her classmates with the casual pride of someone who never questioned her place in the world. Braylen felt a strange ache in her chest, something like joy, only deeper. When they returned home, Lulu curled up on the couch with a blanket and her favorite book. Braylen stepped into the kitchen, where Sawyer was drying the dishes from breakfast, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. He turned, drying his hands on a towel. "We make a good team." She rested her chin on his chest. "You ever think about making it official?" His brows lifted slightly. "You mean?" "I mean," she said, pulling something from her pocket. "I bought this weeks ago. I wasn't sure when to ask." He took the small box from her hand and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band engraved on the inside with the words, "Found in the fall." His throat worked before he could speak. "You're proposing to me?" "I am." He stared at her for a long moment, then closed the box and pulled her into a kiss that didn't ask any questions. When he finally pulled back, his voice was quiet. "Yes." They were married in the garden they'd built together, beneath an arch of wildflowers planted by the neighborhood kids. Lulu insisted on being the flower girl and the efficient, and no one had the heart to tell her she had to choose, so she did both. Braylen wore a dress made of silk and laughter, her heels replaced with bare feet in the grass. Sawyer wore a suit that didn't quite match, but fit him perfectly in every way that mattered. The ceremony was short, but the celebration lasted until the stars came out. Later that night, after the cake had been cut and the last of the sparklers had burned down to smoke, they lay in a hammock strung between 2 trees, watching Lulu chase fireflies in her white dress. "Did you ever think you'd end up here?" Braylen asked. Sawyer laced his fingers through hers. "Not even in my wildest dreams." She turned her head. "And now," now," he said. "I can't imagine being anywhere else." They didn't need to say more. The air was full of everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, and everything still waiting just beyond the horizon. The city buzzed quietly in the distance, a hum they no longer needed to compete with. And in the backyard turned sanctuary, surrounded by soft lights, laughter, and the family they chose, Braylen and Sawyer found not just love but home.